Hello and welcome to this week's Blockchain Gaming News Roundup with me, Jenna Jordan, and co-host John Jordan. It's Friday, the 22nd of August. How are you doing?
Yeah. Last burst of summer.
Yeah.
Before we're into September.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, not quite actually, are we?
Cool, now we can get into normal routines.
Yeah.
Right, let's dive in. So Pirate Nation came out with some surprising news this week that they are, well, actually Proof of Play has the surprising news that it's going to shut down Pirate Nation. In conjunction with that, they are also going to sunset the Apex blockchain and Boss blockchain, which is sort of sub-chains on Arbitrum. That was built to support their game and also other games, but clearly it's not been kind of as widely used. Talk us through a little bit what's happened there.
Yeah. Again, it's sort of one of those decisions which I think is clearly a sensible decision. They're obviously a sensible team, but it sort of to some degree highlights the sort of the naivety of sort of some of the people in the space. So Proof of Play are one of those sort of teams that we did sort of hope were going to do sort of super well in the sense that they've been making games for a long time. They were the team behind Farmville for Zynga back in the day, obviously about 20 years ago now, 15 years ago. And they also raised quite a lot of money. So they raised like $33 million over 2 years ago. And they were also committed to fully on-chain games, which was something that we're sort of quite interested in and think there's a lot of sort of potential there. But clearly for most of those fully on-chain games, we're seeing the problem is, is getting audience. Obviously, sort of getting audience for any blockchain game is sort of quite difficult, or certainly sustaining one. But for fully on-chain games, obviously the issue there is you tend to have a lot of transactions, and so that means you have a lot of sort of costs around the game, just in terms of even gas fees. And to a degree, I think Proof of Play sort of naive's not the right word, but they drunk a little bit of their own Kool-Aid, I think. So Pirate Nation was still is actually for another month at least till they shut it down. It's a fully on-chain game, and it has quite a lot of the sort of elements you'd expect. So it's a pirate game. You have a ship, or we have many ships, and you go off and do sort of turn-based attacking, and it's a deck-building game. But interestingly, the cards aren't NFTs that you own, but the ships are, and you can sort of level them up. And there was a very deep, actually, a very deep crafting element as well. So you had these sort of effectively crafting stations, little factories, and you could build up. Started off with very basic things, and obviously then you sort of built them up, and then there was a big marketplace, and you could people were being like, well, you could get a ship's right license, and you could sort of then you could make ships or repair ships or something like that, and so there was quite a deep sort of system in play. But obviously that, to a degree, like every game, that sort of only works if you've got enough people in there who are trading. Why would you buy a ship's right license if there's not people who want to make ships and use your facilities, sort of thing? And what they found, I think, is they had a core audience to some degree. I mean, I was a core audience member at certain points, but they sort of, like many games, they sort of got a bit waylaid by this sort of play-to-airdrop thing. So it was June last year, actually, they released the pirate token, and actually, the sentiment was quite good then, and they, did it. It was everything they did was free, so it was a free mint for the NFTs, and that the play to airdrop campaign, so people who played the game then got airdrop the pirate token, and they did quite a nice thing where you immediately stake the pirate token for these what they called points. It was Proof of Play points, so everyone was sort of expecting sort of pirate was the token around this game, and then there was going to be, because they were focused on infrastructure as well, there was going to be like a blockchain, and that was where the points were going to come. So there was quite a lot of hype around it. And they never really gave out figures, but I got the impression they were getting to like 80,000, 100,000 daily active unique wallets, during this period of time. And because that was such a lot, and they were fully on-chain game, that started getting expensive. I think they were originally on Polygon back in the day. So they actually came up, and as you said, they had their own blockchains. They launched from this one called Apex, and that got really full because they had all these people coming in for the airdrops, and they had after the token went live. They had multiple airdrop campaigns. I think three seasons in total. So they were at that point getting quite a lot of audience, because if you do a token airdrop. And they got so much, in fact, they was like, oh, we're going to launch another blockchain. So we had Apex, and then we had Boss, and they were really busy. You looked at the block explorers; they were some of the busiest sort of L3 blockchains based on Arbitrum. But then, as ever, as the sort of the incentives wind down, the token price drops because people are getting it and selling it. The audience is going away and doing other things. And I was someone who played the game regularly, probably for about a year, and then not so much sort of this year, because one of the struggles I had, and I actually spoke to the CEO about it, is I thought it was an impressive game, but I didn't feel it was a very fun game. You sort of went through and did your sort of battles, and it felt a bit mechanical. So there just wasn't quite that sort of spark of something that you needed, I felt, at least. So this, fast forward, they end up in a situation where instead of 100,000 daily active unique wallets, they're down probably to about under 10,000 now. So they've invested all this money in all this infrastructure, all these blockchains that they needed because they had so much activity. They don't have that activity now. The blockchains are expensive to run, so they've said it costs $150,000 a month to run these blockchains, and they haven't got the audience. So they said they made $2 million last year, but obviously last year everyone was coming in and buying stuff because there was a play-to-airdrop. This year, they're making any money at all from Pirate Nation. The other thing they were talking about in the early days was they, like GDC, fully on chain, so anyone can come in and start building, in that game or taking that game and building. I remember them talking about maybe someone making ninja games using the sort of components. That never really took off, and again, that's something that blockchain games do talk about a lot. But you need some sort of coordinating action. You need like a DAO giving out grants, or I think you need something than just hoping people are going to come. And maybe they were doing stuff behind the scenes, but they could never get any of that stuff to a sort of point in which it was cost effective. So obviously they've raised a ton of money. They've spent some of that money because they're operating a development shop in East Coast, West Coast, West Coast America. It's expensive, but you can't really. There's no point in you running infrastructure that's costing you, whatever it is, 150, over $1 million a year, if no one's sort of playing on it. So they, I'm sure they've thought about various different things, but they've taken a pragmatic decision to shut down that game and sort of draw a line under that. Although there are like some of the components of the game, like particularly the battle mode, they're now running some stuff on Abstract, the blockchain. So they're not paying for that. There's not their blockchain, so they don't have to worry about the sort of cost of running it. And basically, for that, they're running a leaderboard with rewards, but you pay I think it's like 40 cents a go. So it's like like an old arcade game. You have to play to sort of pay a little bit of money to play. And obviously, if you're doing that, you're getting some of the Abstract XP rewards, which some people are collecting. I'm not really so bothered myself, but so they're doing that. They have a whole bunch of other infrastructure stuff they've spoken about, like they run this infrastructure for random numbers, which is sort of really dull but really important in blockchain. So I think they're making some money from that as well. So obviously people are sort of annoyed if they spent money buying these NFT tokens and whatever. People get annoyed, but people get annoyed by anything. So they have said there'll be a last allocation. So for NFT holders, there'll be a last allocation of Pirate token. So you get some free Pirate token. The price is low at the moment, but you get some free money. And there'll also be a 2-week season where you can take the assets, all these things you've got in the game, these crafting assets really, and burn them all, and you get a certificate, which may give you rewards in future. So, I mean, the key thing is the company's not shutting down, because obviously they've raised quite a lot of money. They've probably got many years of runway, I would think. But they're just sort of refocusing on what can we do that's actually useful. And like a lot of blockchain games now, you can't just go and refund or get funding again. Maybe some of them can, but you have to prove you're sort of making money. That's the fundamental thing of every business. If at some point you can't just keep making losses, because at some point you run out of money. So, and if a company can prove it's profitable in some ways, then it can raise more money. Because if you're profitable, like a bank will give you money. I mean, most of the cases they don't, but you can sort of do that. So they're refocusing on that. Obviously, very sensible. You can't just run out of money. That's irresponsible. Sad that this has sort of happened to a company that we thought was going to do a bit better, but they're going to reboot and do something else. And they have said, I think that the one issue I would say that they weren't good at was they launched this Pirate token, and everyone just thought it was for Pirate Nation, and there was going to be another token for the infrastructure, which is why they did this point system. So that meant that people didn't care about the Pirate token I mean, every token price has gone down, but I think they could have been have better communication around that, and they realised that, I think, a bit into the system, and they started saying pirates the token. We're not. They realised that they'd hoped to do a proof of play token for the infrastructure, and then they realised that wasn't going to happen. So then they sort of doubled down on the pirate token. So it's a weird situation where Pirate Nation, the game, is sort of shutting down, but they've really said there's not going to be a proof of play token. Pirate is the token. If we need, we're only going to have one token. At the moment, it's called Pirate. Maybe it will call something else in the future. But this is going to be our token, and this is what we're going to focus our sort of business around. That will be the sort of token that will power these sort of things. So I mean, it's experimental. We all know this blockchain stuff's experimental. So it's interesting to see that the process. I think you can, it's logical what they're trying to do. So yeah, good luck to them.
Do you think the fact that it was a browser game impacts, with a game like many blockchain games, they would sort of require you to log in every day and to get the rewards, because it's so rewards and earn based. They want that daily engagement. And do you think that's harder for a browser game to get than, say, a mobile game?
Yeah, I mean, mobile is very accessible, and obviously you're not after dealing with App Store issues, which for a not fully on-chain game, that those can be more complicated in terms of sort of in-app purchase. Even though App Stores are becoming sort of freer in terms of what you can do, there is a balance there. So browser, you can do what you like, but it's harder, I think, for people to build that into their sort of daily rhythms. And for browser games, you tend to get, I imagine, a lot more sort of bots coming in. Not that bots don't come in for mobile games, but there's a certain different friction there. So yeah, I just kind of think, I mean, it's an analogy I've used a lot, and it's sort of, for blockchain projects in particular, they have to think about, what is it that they're doing? Is the game they're building the thing? Is that the hill that they die on? They've got to get that game to work, or is the blockchain is the sort of the wider project, which could be infrastructure, or could just be an ecosystem, or could just be that game didn't work, we'll do another game, and sort of the token is the hill we'll die on. And I sort of felt a little bit with proof of play. It was a little bit unclear. That was from a retail consumer point of view. That was, is Pirate Nation, the game, the thing that they're really focused on, or is sort of this proof of play infrastructure, is that the thing they're focused on? And they were, I think, internally there, it felt like their focus was sort of changed over time. And obviously that's fine, that you can do that, but obviously that makes it more complicated for people. And I definitely think that hit the pirate, even in my own personal thing, where I really care less about the price of these things very much. When the pirate token came out, and then immediately you were collecting points for this other thing, you're sort of like, well, there's another token coming, sort of thing. And so I think it helped. It's good in the sense that they've cut all that off now and refocused it, and now they've worked out the hill they're going to die on is the pirate token. That's the thing now. So I think that's just sort of a good starting point. But yeah, it was difficult. It never sort of felt that game was going to. They could get enough into that game. It was just, to me. I mean, it's weird because it was deep in terms of features and crafting and stuff, but it never. Is it? When I had, spoken to Amit, the CEO, a couple of times on the podcast, and I mean, I think he had a different view on it from the inside. He really felt there was a really strong, this game is going to work and bring on lots of people. And I played it quite a lot, but I played it in a sort of functional, and you as well. I mean, you played less than me, but you sort of played it in this is my task to do today, to play half an hour of Pirate Nation. It never felt like, oh, let's play an extra half an hour. It's sort of, let's get the stuff today. Let's do the battles, do a bit of crafting, and go and do something else, sort of thing. So it never had that spark for me.
Okay. Let's move on then to Cillian Wales, mobile real-time strategy game Wild, which launched on Ronin at the start of 2024. And you're right. Yeah, the game was live actually quite early. Yeah, in sort of I think sort of Easter 2024. You're right. Yeah. And then I get it right sometimes. Then it's always been quite a volatile time for them. And at the start of this year, they saw a big sort of backlash from the community, and in line with everybody else's tokens sort of dropping, theirs has also plummeted. But now they are sort of trying to rejuvenate somehow and launching on Epic Game Store. So what changes are they making, and why could this be significant for the game? And could it work?
I wouldn't necessarily overplay it. I mean, I think they were. It was sort of, to a degree, a little bit of stuff that they did, and a little bit of stuff outside their control. So, as you say, the game went live sort of Easter last year. Excuse me. It's just like they call it a single screen sort of PvP strategy game. It is quite a nice game. They have a lot of experience in making these sort of games, and I have sort of played it off and on. It's a game that I sort of wish I got more into. I'm not a massive PvP sort of person, a bit squeamish about that. But anyway, I felt there was something there, and like Ronin last year had a really good sort of period of time, and lots of stuff was launching, and there's lots of activity, and they had they did a token pre-sale that went pretty well. The NFTs were sort of selling really well as well. So, and it had a good game. So it was all sort of set quite fair. But like everything in the world, as soon as you launch a token, that becomes an issue. So as we sort of discussed a lot of times, maybe not good to launch a token at any point, but certainly they launched a token end of last year, which sort of was not a good time. Really, it was just very volatile. And by that stage, I mean, I never really got to the bottom of it. By that stage, a lot of the community didn't like some of the stuff they were doing. I mean, I don't know the reasons, but basically, there was a backlash around some of the sort of how they were launching the token and that sort of stuff. So they launched in a sort of
reading their own sort of communication out to the community about what was going on. It was never really clear. It was never easy to understand what they were doing with the token, and I think that's one of the problems often with these projects. You might not know really themselves what they're doing, or maybe they do and they're just not very good at communicating it because they haven't got sort of high-end marketing teams. I don't know, but that was sort of one of the problems, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the fastest way to kill your project is launch a token. That people have tokens because they feel they need tokens. Yeah, you in a sense you maybe do, but maybe you use USDC. So you use a stablecoin or something. Anyway, so they launched it at exactly the worst time, and sort of a lot of the Ronin sort of euphoria was sort of dropped. Sort of the spin was coming off that, as shine was coming off that as well. So for a lot of tokens have done this, but they did it. It went really bad. They just sort of, the token price just sort of collapsed straight. Went down to 90% straight away, pretty much. And they obviously were aware of it. They were trying to sort of regain sort of people's support and stuff. And to be fair, say they are an experienced team, and they just sort of, I think they're a team who just get on and do stuff. And I think for them, this is the hill that they die on. They're not doing infrastructure. They're very much a game-focused sort of organisation. Maybe they'll do other games if one doesn't work, but I think this is the genre of game they made. This is what they thought was the best game they could do, and they just kept building. So I mean, it's a you were sort of like the sort of comeback story. The token is still down 80% from its high, so it's up actually 400% from its low, which is a few months ago. So from that point of view, there's quite a substantial bounce. And they're building new features. So that say that it's a PvP game, but they're building a PvE sort of campaign. So let's say it's a little bit like they had with sort of FIFA Rivals. The first thing you get out is a PvP because that's easier to do from a game development point of view. PvE is much, you have to polish that a lot more. But most people, or at least I think the majority of people, like to sort of play against the game first to get a feel for how you do this sort of stuff more than just a tutorial, rather than, because if you're playing against other players as a newbie, then all the other players are better than you, and you just you have to go through this process of getting beaten for the first 10 games. It's just not nice. And obviously if you will learn, but it's just not a nice onboarding experience. So you play the first 3 games, lose, then delete it. So I think they had a bit of a problem from that point of view, nothing to do with blockchain. So they're doing that. They're doing a PvE thing. They're sort of resetting a little bit some of their rewards. So they're giving because on Ronin they're taking a leaf out of the sort of the Axie book and giving away a bit more rewards for the token. So I mean that's not good I think in the long term, but it gets people in because you can to a degree just a bit of a play to earn thing. They're talking about esports. I'm not a massive fan of. I think that's difficult. You can spend a lot of money building out an esport tournament that no one really cares about. So we'll see how that one plays out. But I do think it's a game that deserves a sort of second chance. I sort of, it was one I hoped was sort of, it was never going to be a massive hit, I didn't think, but you sort of hoped it would find its fan base and sort of just, like some games do. They're not massive hits. They just sort of sit there and sort of slowly grow over time. And it's interesting, some blockchain games have been discussing it sort of the other day. There's quite a few ones that have been around for sort of many years. Splinterlands we'll talk about later, and Alien Worlds and DeFi Kingdoms, and some of these games that they get spoken about in crypto Twitter or anything, but they just sort of have an audience and survive, and and so maybe that's where Wild Forest sort of ends up. But I think it's sort of nice to highlight these games that sort of don't give up and shut down, and they try to sort of rebuild their vision.
Yeah. And you can tell then also that these are proper game developers. They have experience of doing that. They know how to sort of build out features and expand. Yeah, no, that's right. Anyway, let's move on and talk about Overtake, which announced that they had raised 7 million in funding for their item marketplace on Sui. So is this new funding? Do you know?
Yeah.
The details of this.
Yeah, I won't go too much detail on this. So it is a little bit opaque. So Overtake is actually it's a South Korean company, and they are doing a game item NFT platform. But basically they come out of there's two companies which actually they started off separately, but now they're sort of owned by the same company. One's called ItemBay and one's called ItemMania, and they're basically South Korean only Web2 game marketplaces. So for all the big Korean MMORPGs, all those items and stuff, you can trade them on these marketplaces. So I've never used them, obviously not playing those South Korean games, and they're only in Korean, they're in English. But they sort of claim, like everyone claims these vanity figures, 30 million users, and I think it's $700 million worth of annual trading volume. So, I mean, take that with a pinch of salt, but fairly large, And now they're basically looking to see if they can do that on Web3 rails rather than, it's complicated doing small transactions on Web2 stuff. So if they can do that on Web3, that's sort of their goal. As I say, it's interesting because they, as far as I can see and looking at what they've got live at the moment, is obviously they can do NFTs, but they're looking to do Web2 stuff as well. So they're looking to do, just these big Web2 MMORPGs or any Web2 game. They want to potentially support trading of those in-game items, which aren't NFTs. Effectively, they'll make them NFTs for their marketplace to trade them. So that's sort of interesting in the sense of bringing blockchain to an existing business model and hoping blockchain, allows you to do that better. So they're funded mainly by these sort of existing companies in Korea. But there is some confusion, as you say. So when I first looked at Overtake, they were doing a lot of stuff on Immutable, and they had these games. They weren't, so they're not a game maker, but they had these games, and they were sort of running social farming campaigns, and they've got this Take token because their token is called Take. So they were doing basically a pre-launch for this token that's coming out. I don't know, this year I would imagine, but they were doing that, and they basically published some games, didn't make them. They published some games and got people playing them, and they were doing quite a lot. They were doing actually the majority of the activity on Immutable at one point, a couple of months ago. But then they stopped the campaign, and they're as always happens, the activity on Immutable basically went to zero because people were just social farming for this token allocation sort of thing. So they previously were running on Immutable, and Immutable in this funding round they did say they got money from Immutable, but then they've since announced that the actual platform they're doing. So what they're doing on Immutable was sort of like a pre-launch thing for their token, but their actual marketplace is running on Sui, and they've got a grant from Sui to do this thing on Sui. So I was a little bit. It wasn't very clear. The press release wasn't very clear about the money. It had Immutable in there, and clearly they're not doing anything on Immutable now. So that seems to me that they're bringing together, lifetime funding and not calling it lifetime funding. But as they also pointed out, they've raised $7 million from there are some VCs as well, South Korean VCs involved. But they also said there's $20 million sort of internal money. And basically that's come from the holding company of this, as far as I can gather, the holding company who owns ItemMania and ItemBay have put money in as well. So, that's the whole sort of thing. But yeah, sort of interesting to see how that stuff plays out. A little bit sort of geeky because it's this sort of, this Korean companies trying to bring this stuff to blockchain. So probably maybe a bit less exciting than it seemed when people thought they were like a gaming platform on Immutable. But,
you do like to unpack funding rounds, don't you?
I do.
Yeah. Let's move on to Splinterlands, and this was a headline actually this week that really made me laugh. So Splinterland has launched a $500,000 fund to onboard and basically try and bring players to their ecosystem from failed Web3 games, basically other blockchain games that have been shut down. So which ones were the ones they're starting with? You know this better than me, so I'll leave it over to you.
Yeah, so what's it actually called? The Crypto Gaming Recovery Fund. So a little bit pompous, but sort of a little bit fun as well, I think. So going back to what we were saying, there are some games that no one talks about anymore that have been going for years and years and years. So Splinterlands is one of them. It's been going for over 5 years, I think. No, even longer than that. Must be longer than that.
When we talk about them, we're the only ones talking about them, and one of the reasons this was my first big love in blockchain gaming. Yeah. I don't know, at the time I think I spent 2-3 hours a day, which for me is a lot, on this game. I was like completely obsessed with it. I got really good actually as well.
Yeah, you were. And it is one of these games that's sort of gone through cycles. So it was really massive at one point in terms of hundreds of thousands of people playing every day. Obviously a lot of bots in there, and they were one of the first games to sort of radically reset their reward program to get rid of bots and sort of try and get the rewards to players rather than bots and all that sort of stuff, and they're a very non-traditional dev team. They're not a game dev team. They're like sort of slightly slightly sort of do-it-yourself sort of crypto guys. That's how they got into doing it. So, but it's a game that's been there, pretty solid. Again, not the most exciting game. They probably got a bit over their skis at some points with some of the land stuff they were doing, but that's how it goes, isn't it? So, but they're still going on sort of, I think they've maybe under 10,000 DAUs, haven't looked recently, a few thousand anyway, daily active players. And they've basically put out this sort of crypto fund, and basically all it is a marketing fund to get people playing Splinterlands. But they basically, there is a DAO there, so sort of somewhat separate from the dev company. They've put together a whole bunch of assets, basically in-game assets for Splinterlands, and they've said they're going to support games that are basically shutting down. So at the moment, if you go to the website, the only two they have are Tokyo Beast, which is a very niche game on Immutable, and Walking Dead Empires, which is on Gala. And they also in their literature talk about Ember Sword. There was a sort of big game on Immutable, and also because it's a DAO, they vote on stuff. So they've put one out now for Pirate Nation, which we've discussed is shutting down. So you can kind of see what they're doing. Basically, what you do is you have to, there's a drop down sort of form. You fill in what game you're claiming for. You put in your wallet address. They check that you actually have those NFTs in your wallet. You have to, the provisos are, you have to create a Splinterlands account. So you have to have sort of your email in there. And you have to spend $10 buying their entry level pack, which gets you the blockchain enabled part of the game. In that $10, you do get like $8 back effectively in in-game assets. So you're not just paying $10. But basically what they're saying, if you do that, they'll give you the $10 back in in-game credit, so you can buy cards and stuff. And then this other fund is going to basically it sounds like every year it's going to run for 7 years, they say, and every year it's going to, if you keep playing the game and you have an active account, people who have basically onboarded through this mechanism will get sort of in-game stuff airdropped to them. So it's slightly less compelling when explained in this way, I suppose. But it is, in some ways it's a cheeky thing they're doing, and the framing around it is sort of cheeky. And again, interestingly, people don't seem to cover it because, maybe they think it's too cheeky, or, maybe they just don't cover Splinterlands. I don't know. But I think it's it's something that blockchain really should be doing more about as a sort of industry, really, because obviously the whole point of all these, when I look at some of my old wallets, there's all these NFTs from games that don't exist anymore. I'm not bothered. It's sort of quite a nice sort of history lesson. But equally, you kind of think there would be some of these maybe bigger companies could think about, well, how can we actually, how can we sort of show that blockchain, even though the companies aren't there anymore, the stuff on the blockchain still exists and can still be used. And could you do a big meta game using this sort of stuff? And people have sort of kicked around some ideas around that in the past, but no one's taken it seriously. Obviously, the problem is you're sort of if you're doing that, you're sort of you're revaluing old assets from companies that don't exist anymore. You're not how do you generate revenue from that? But in the sense, there should be something there. I would also point out that's gone.
No.
I would also say that actually for some of these games, for Pirate Nation, they are, they're shutting down in a controlled way, and they're giving, NFT holders are getting another airdrop, and you can burn your assets and get these rewards. And actually, Tokyo Beast were quite good at also. They had $300,000 to give back to people, so not like the games they may be choosing are not the sort of the rugs and stuff like that, or some of them aren't. People generally are. Some blockchain games companies, the better ones, are quite good at explaining why they're doing it and actually giving people some sort of recompense as well. So, but I think there is a wider thing in there that how could you do something using these sort of what's the term, abandoned assets?
Yeah. I guess one of the sort of hot takes recently I've seen is that people claim there aren't that many. I mean, we know there aren't that many players in total that play enabled games, and to think that you're gonna get, so if there were 10,000 people playing Pirate Nation and then there were 10,000 players of Tokyo Beast, that wasn't probably the case. But to think then that you're gonna we bring 20,000 over to, but many of the players of Web3 games are the same, like all over the various games. They're spread out thinly.
Yep.
So it's unlikely that you'll see a massive boost of gathering like masses of
no, absolutely. But I do think there are people who probably have come in and spent money, and then the game sort of shut down, and then they go, oh, if that's blockchain gaming, then not for me. They told me these things would live, these games would you couldn't shut them down, they'd live forever, sort of thing, and basically they shut it down or done a rug or something. So there is a sort of wider thing around that, but it would be very complicated to do. It wouldn't necessarily be costly, I don't think, but it would be a sort of a meta type game.
I'll definitely start playing again and see if there's a bit more activity on there. You get some competition. Would be good. Right, so finally, Project O is launching on Immutable, was announced this week. So what is that?
Yeah, so I mean, as I always say, do we need another trading card game? Obviously we don't, but we have one. And interestingly, Immutable already has obviously its own Gods Unchained, which has been going for a long time, and also quite a big game this year from Ubisoft, Might and Magic Fates. So it's another trading card game. So another trading card game doesn't certainly set my world alight, and I just kind of think, as we've discussed before, the usual problems. People like making them because they're easy in terms of artwork, and so everyone knows sort of what you get, and everyone knows how to make them, and the cards obviously fit well as a blockchain item for ownership. So it ticks a lot of boxes. The problem is they're quite niche. They can be quite complex for people to learn all these different cards and what they do. And yeah, I think you have a sort of capped audience really, unless you do get some breakout games. So the last one was Marvel Snap, which is a really sort of big hit, but that was like a really solid team, and they had the Marvel license, so to a degree hard to replicate. So Project O, I don't know if that's going to be the name. It's not a very good name, but it is what it is. Some people in crypto Twitter, people have got really excited about this. They've done a lot of stuff with like Wolves DAO, and they're doing loads of play tests, and it's really nice. The artwork and stuff is really nicely designed. Looks nice. IP is sort of current. The launch IP is like a little, sort of clever, but a little bit weak. So they're using basically out of copyright, sort of nursery rhymes and historic books. So, the key figures they're using in their sort of market moments, like, a version of Winnie the Pooh, like a big bear sort of thing, and sort of a lot of Alice in Wonderland stuff, Cheshire Cat and Queen of Hearts and Robin Hood and Sherlock Holmes and the three little pigs. There's some fun stuff you can do with that, but it obviously doesn't, it doesn't sort of set people's pulses racing to have Winnie the Pooh, even a big muscular version of Winnie the Pooh. So there's that sort of aspect to it. They have some nice blockchain stuff in terms of how they're going to do some stuff around ownership, and I think some passive income stuff. But people have done that in the past, and that's never really worked for anyone. So I kind of think for Immutable, they're sort of at this weird stage now where, as I said, they still quote this number. We've got 650 well-funded games. It's like, well, great, but you've shown me the one that people are playing, and they haven't got a game that anyone's playing. So maybe between those two trading card games they get somewhere, but it's a game that you sort of hope will sort of do something, and maybe it will be that it's one of those games that sits there about 100,000, 10,000, and there's like a nice niche thing going on there, and it's a good demonstration of the technology. But I think it's sort of hard that it'll be the massive sort of breakout hit that people are looking for. But it looks nice at least.
Good. So end on that positive note then. We'll see you back next week.